Okay, so I wet my J-cloth, and I'm just going to lay my sticky paper down here. And I want to make sure that that's lined up well with the bottom of my paper there. And then I'm just going to glue this on top of here. And this is only to hold it together until I get the material on, so it's not meant to be like something that sticks permanently. I'm just going to pull these guys up. So there we go. We got a nice wide space between there so that you can flip your lid open and closed. And once this dries a little bit, I'm just going to take my ruler. Make sure that they're even. Yep. I'm just going to take my ruler and cut off that excess craft paper. Okay, so there is our book together. This piece isn't sticking very well, so let me just, if it doesn't stick, I'm just going to add some glue real quick. I think my cloth was too wet. There we go. Now, it's only holding on by probably 1/4 of an inch, so I probably could have used 2 of these pieces of tape just to be secure, but because I know I'm putting that fabric on the other side, it's going to hold it. Okay, so there's your book cover together. Let's move that out of the way. And I'm just going to set this aside for a moment. I am going to use another piece of denim. I bought these jeans at a thrift store. I was fill a bag for $5, and I went and picked out the largest pair of jeans I could find. I think I got 3 pair and a skirt and something else, maybe some hospital scrubs. And I filled that bag for $5. So this worked out really well. And I bring everything home and wash it in nice hot water. So this is my piece. So what you're going to need to do is measure how wide a piece you need for your fabric. So I'm going to say I definitely need 4 inches to go from this side to this side. But I also have to go down into those grooves, and they are 1/4 inch wide. So out there I need 4.5 automatically. And I want to give myself a little bit more because when you go down, it's going to actually stick to the edges as well. So I figure I'm going to give myself a 5-inch piece, and that should give me enough to go past this blue and go down into the grooves of each of those grooves when I push the fabric in there. And it should just go past that. So I'm going to try a 5-inch piece wide. And then again, I probably want a 9-inch high piece. You want to go about 1/2 inch above and below your book. So I need 5 inches. I'm just going to use my ruler, and I'm lining it up on the edge of my material here. And again, my rotary cutter blade is not very good. It's probably at the end of its rope. So I should probably change it. There we go. And I need about a 9-inch piece. So let's say, I'm just going to turn this around. And let's say, did I say 9 inches or 8 inches? Nope, 9 inches. And you really want to make sure that these 2 edges are straight. You don't have to worry so much about the ends because they're going to get tucked under. But I do want to make sure that my edges are straight. And again, just going to chop that off. And if you want to use just plain black fabric or any other color fabric, you can. I'm just using the denim because I'm in that denim series of journals that I'm making, so I thought these would just kind of work alongside the others. And then what we have here is our piece to go on the spine. And again, it's going to go down inside. I just have this. This is a 3M spatula. I think this was for doing wallpapering. I use it a lot. But see how you're going to have to go down into those grooves on each side. So it's going to pull it in a little bit more. So you want to make sure you have enough to cover either side of that. Okay, so that's another thing that you have to remember. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark the center of my spine here and the center of my material, and I just fold this in half. I'm just going to take a marker here. And I'm just going to fold that in half. And make a little mark there. And do the same thing on this end. Make a little mark there. So that's the center of my fabric. And I'm going to center that on this. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this over. And I'm going to mark the center of this spine. So it's 1.5. So 1/2 inch is 1 and 2 right there. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5/8 is my center mark. There. I'm going to do the same thing on this side. Just on my spine here. Go down a bit. There's my 5/8. And the reason I'm doing it that way is what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the glue on my spine, and I'm going to have my fabric laying here like this, and I'm going to line it up with some of these marks. I'm going to turn my mat this way. If this makes any sense whatsoever. Again, you probably have an easier way of doing this, but I like to do things the difficult way. It makes it so much more fun. So that when I glue my spine, and I'm just going to glue the chipboard, not inside the grooves or the blue part, when I go to lay it down like this, I will actually line it up with my lines and push it down, and then I'll flip it over and work from the other side. So that's what I'm going to do right now. And I do have a little bit of this glue left. I'm going to have to refill my bottle. So I will turn off my camera when I refill my bottle. So you don't have to, it's like watching ketchup come out. I might end up using Fabri-Tac if I don't get this to come out right away. But I wanted to show you how to glue the spine on, and then while it's drying I can refill my glue bottle. It's not going to come out. So we're using Fabri-Tac. And I'll show you why I don't like to use Fabri-Tac, because it leaves little grooves. So we're going to have to flatten it out a little bit. And it absorbs into the chipboard very quickly, glue. So you just want to put on a light coating. You don't want to soak it, because it'll, if you make the chipboard too wet, it will actually bend and warp a bit. So you don't want to make your chipboard too wet. All right. I just want to make sure that has a nice covering of Fabri-Tac. Okay, now I'm going to do this way by flipping it over and lining up those marks so that it's centered. Okay, I'm going to push down on that. And then I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to rub that so that's, and really push on the edges. Feel the edges of your chipboard and make sure that it's covered. And you want that to dry before you do the next step, which is lifting this up and doing your creases. So let's let that dry, and we'll move on to the next part. All right, that should be dry now. And I filled up my glue bottle. And the glue I'm using is Well-to-Bond, non-toxic, bonds almost anything. And yeah, again, the only reason I'm using is because I had 3 bottles of it that I got from an artsy treasure sale. A little thrift treasure sale, garage sale type thing. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is, now that this fabric has dried just on that spine part, we're going to lift it back and we're going to put some glue in that little crevice there. Just a little bit. You don't want to soak it. You don't want to put tons and tons in there. And then I'm just going to take my paintbrush and I'm just going to, first of all, there, move that over a bit. And you just want to get a little bit into those little edges of the book. And then you're going to let it drop, and you're going to take a spatula or your bone folder or a ruler, and you're just going to rub that in. Now, because this is a little bit thicker, I'm going to really give it a good rub and push to make sure it stays in there. If you're using thinner fabric, you obviously don't have to keep pushing on it and getting it to stay. But you want to make sure that that fabric goes down into that groove. So I'm pushing it down against the side of that book, and then I'm going down in and pushing it down along the side of the cover. And then what I'm going to do is, it's going to go past that blue part. And again, you don't have to use tons of glue on this. You just want enough to cover the surface. And I want to make sure that I do right on that edge. So I'm just going to do one more quick little squirt along the edge there. And just gently make sure that that fits. Okay, so again, I'm going to push down in that groove, and then I'm going to lay my spatula or your bone folder on top, and you're going to just pull it flat like that from the center and out. And again, you don't want it to, your material to fray, but you can actually put a little bit of glue along the edge and it'll hold. I'm going the wrong way. And that'll stop it from fraying if you put a little bit of glue along the edge there. Okay, so we got that piece on there. And I like to tidy up my edges once it's all glued down. So we're going to flip it over. We're going to lift it up and do the other side. And again, we're going to spread that glue in there. You want to make sure not to get too much on the top here. You just want to do the groove, or else it catches on the edge of this book and it doesn't push down into the groove. So again, we're going to push with the edge of our bone folder or a ruler. You can use a ruler. Push it in like that if you like, or like I say, a bone folder. I think this little blue spatula thing I use in all of my projects. I think I've used it in practically everything I've ever made. Again, and then I'm just going to slide that down. You just want to make sure you don't pull the fabric away from the first part there. Okay, and then I'm just going to put a little bit of glue here, spread it flat. Again, you don't want this to be too thick because it'll seep through. If you're, especially if you're using the cotton fabric, it will seep through and you will have glue coming through your fabric. So you want to use, and that's why I think Claudia uses a little foam roller, and she just rolls a very thin coating of glue onto the surface of the piece of chipboard so that it does not come through the fabric. Because I'm using the jeans, I don't mind using a little tiny bit more. Right, oops. Pull that off. And I want to make sure I get my edges in my corners. And then I'm going to flip this over. And you're just going to glue that little piece of denim down, and that little piece of cardboard is coming up, so make sure that's glued. that. Okay. And this is all going to get covered on the inside, so don't worry about it if a little bit of the glue shows past your fabric there. Now, if you're using a solid book cover like this one, you don't have to do any of this step because it already has the spine and everything included. When we get to the measuring part, the next step of measuring for the box, that is when you will want to make sure that your spine has a little piece of cardstock or chipboard in there where you can cover it with the fabric. But because you're going to glue your spine to your box, you don't need anything in there, so you just want to have a little piece of chipboard or something if it's just that really thin material of the book cover. You want to have something in there to glue to the side of the box. So I just add like a piece of cardstock or file folder to the inside of the book cover here before. This one I covered in fabric because I was leaving it open. But you just want to add a little piece of cardstock or file folder just to make sure that that spine has a little bit of substance, so when you glue it to that, you're not just gluing it to that little tiny piece of fabric of the spine. Okay, so there's my cover. Put my glue lid on. We're going to let that dry. So next, and don't bend it too much because it pulls it away, so really let it dry before you start flopping it around. Okay, so I'm just going to set this aside for a second. So the next part you want to measure for is this box here, and you literally only want, I would say, 1/8 of an inch showing at the top and the bottom and at the sides. So what you have to take into account when you're measuring up for this box is that thickness of chipboard that you're using, because when you're making the box, let me just grab my bits and pieces and I'll show you. These are all the pieces that you're going to need for inside the book cover. So number one, you need that chipboard piece for the spine. So that's number one. Okay, so whatever width you want this to be, that's your spine. So number one, chipboard piece is spine. If you're using two covers, if you're using a book cover, skip that part. The next thing you want to do is you want to create a base that's going to go inside. So this box is going to sit inside the book, but again you have to take into account the thickness of your chipboard, because when you put these together, side, I have no idea what that piece is. Oh, that's my spacer. So there's my 4 sides of my box. And again, the height of all these sides are the width of that ruler, because I was cheating and I did a 1 1/4 inch. That's my spine, so that's how tall my box is going to be. So all my pieces were 1 1/4 inches thick. So what you have to take into account is that these are going to get glued onto the outside of your base. They don't sit on top of the base, they get glued to the outside of the base. So this edge is going to be touching your book. So you're going to have that thickness of chipboard, and you're going to have that thickness of chipboard included in your base height. Okay, does that make sense? So you need your base plus the two of your sides together. That's going to be what's covering the bottom part of your book cover. So literally we're doing this, and the same with this side. It's going to go on the book, not on the base. It's going to go on the side of the book, and we're going to be gluing these pieces all together like that. Okay, so that is what's making our box base. And then we have a little divider piece that goes inside right here. And this divider piece, I think I cut this exactly the same width as my side. It actually has to be 1/8 or the thickness of your book board smaller, because it's going to be sitting on top of the board, whereas this side is going to be on the book. So see, it's a little bit farther up. I have to cut this down a little bit. And I'm going to show you that because I haven't cut any of the chipboard. I've already pre-cut it. So these are the pieces that you're going to need. You're going to need your base. And it's going to be smaller by the width of this chipboard plus your 1/8 that you want to show. If you want a little bit more to show, if you want a 1/4 inch to show, then you take into account. So you measure your book. So this is 7 5/8. I'm going to take I think I just did an 1/8 inch on either end. I think maybe even a 1/4 inch, but say an 1/8 inch. So that's a 1/4 inch we're taking off of that measurement right there. So it's going to be 7 3/8 instead of 7 5/8. So that's what we're going to be starting with. Then we need to take off the thickness of 2 of these pieces, which is almost a 1/4 inch, okay, because I'm using the really thick chipboard. So we're taking a 1/4 inch off for either side, plus we're taking a 1/4 inch off for the thickness of the 2 ends. That's how the height of your base is going to be. And then the same for the width. You're going to take the width from right from the edge of your spine. So when your board is up like this, when your book is up like this, you're going to push your ruler up to the spine, and it's 5 1/4 inches is the width of my book. I know I want a 1/4 inch showing, so I need 5 inches. And then my base, I need to have a 1/4 inch smaller because of the 2 sides. So it's going to be 4 3/4 is my base. See, 4 3/4, and then a 1/4 inch is going to be my 2 sides, and it's going to give me 5 inches. I hope that makes sense. You always have to take into account, because the sides are going against the sides of the base and not on the base, you have to take that 1/4 inch or whatever thickness that your chipboard is by 2, and you have to take that measurement off. So you cut your base to fit that size. I know it sounds really technical, but and then what you can normally do is cut your pieces, cut your base, and I normally cut my base, and then my 2 sides are part of the same piece because they're the same width, right, as the width of my base. So you're going to cut one long piece, and you're going to make sure it fits your base and your 2 sides, whatever the height's going to be. So I believe this is 7 inches, my base, and these are 1 1/4. So 7, 8, 9 1/2 inches was my piece of chipboard, and then I cut my pieces. This piece is going to be the height of my base plus that 1/4 inch thickness of these 2 pieces, because they're going to be butting up to the sides of those pieces. So your longer sides are going to go on the outside, but they're going to be butting up to those 2 little end side pieces. So your base, your 2 sides get cut out of 1 piece, whatever the height is, you have to make sure that. And then this piece is going to be the height, plus you add on the thickness of 2 pieces of chipboard. And then the divider is just the height of your base, and you can take your height of 1 1/4, and you're going to take 1/4 inches off of this, which I'm going to do right now with my ruler and my knife and this ruler. I always forget the part of taking that 1/4 inch off because of the base of the, and it's actually not even a 1/4 inch, it's 1/8 of an inch, because I'm only taking it off 1 width of the chipboard, the base width of the chipboard. So it's probably just 1/8 of an inch you need to take off. Okay, and I'm going to use my safety ruler. So I really only need to take off a tiny bit off of this one. Okay, and a sharp blade. And don't push really hard trying to cut through the whole thing at once. You just want to do a couple of score it, and then just do light. Oops, and I'm cutting it on my. Move this guy out of the way. Cutting it on my gluing mat. Take a big slice out of my gluing mat. Okay, there. And you just want to do nice, easy cuts like this. If you push really hard, it pushes your chipboard together, and then it's harder to get your blade through. So just nice, easy little strokes and it cuts through it no problem. See? And that will be better on my, I'm just going to move this guy out of the way. And then the other thing to do is once you get all your pieces cut, always test it before you put all the fabric and everything on them. What I normally do is take my masking tape and I will actually tape the pieces onto together. So I will tape this piece on this corner here, making sure they're flat. And then I will take this other little piece and I will tape that one into place, and I'll tape all the four sides and make sure it's nice and even, and then I'll just slide my divider in and make sure it fits perfectly. So see how my divider is now a little bit shorter? And that's what you want when you're gluing it in, because you want all this to be level so when the book closes there's nothing sticking up. Okay, so those are the 6 pieces you need for the box. And then for this side, because it's just going to be material, you can stick the material right on this, but because I'm using a thicker material here, I've just taken a piece of file folder, or you can use poster board or Bristol board, whatever you like. I'm just using a thinner one. And this is going to be covered in fabric. And then I'm going to glue that on to there. So that will cover up that little bit of denim material that we're going to see, and then the box gets glued to the spine. So you only want this to be 1/8 inch smaller than the actual book cover. And then this is going to get covered in fabric like that. So this piece actually has the file folder. I glue the fabric to that, and then I glue the piece in there, and it's just, like I say, 1/8 inch smaller than the actual cover. So you need that piece, your base, and your 4 sides, so it's 5, and your divider is 6. And then for the outside, you cover the inside of the box first. For the outside, you're only going to need 3 pieces, which are the top, side, and bottom. Those are the only ones that show because this side is glued to the spine. So you're literally going to take your file folder and you're going to cut a piece exactly the same measurement as your side pieces. So you need 2 small sides and 1 long side. Okay, and those are going to have fabric on them, and they're going to be glued to the outside once we're done. So you're going to need a file folder that will make a cover, the inside of the cover, and 3 pieces that will cover the outside of the box. And again, I'm not really giving you measurements because it depends on the size of books that you're using. So you're going to need those 3 pieces and these 6 pieces. That's your box. Okay, and next we're going to get started on covering the box with fabric. And I normally will start with, I'm going to do the easiest pieces first, which will be the outside. And again, it's whatever fabric you're going to use to cover the outside. I have these little tiny scraps. These are samples. I found them in a thrift store in a little quilting pack, and it had all these different little tiny pieces. And they're not very big. They're only 6 by 12, but they will fit perfectly on for using my, and that's what I'm going to have showing on that outside of my box. So I've got a yellow book, and I'm going to have some yellow and blue striped fabric to match my cover. So that's what I'm going to use for this. And then I have this is a piece I got from Walmart, so it's about 18 by 24, and I won't even use this whole piece, but I need a big enough piece for all of these pieces here, and your little piece of file folder. So we're going to need a piece big enough to cover all of these little pieces. And the one thing you have to be careful of is if your fabric has a pattern and you want any words facing up, you don't want them facing the fabric. If you have a pattern, whenever I write a word on my piece of chipboard, so the divider word is written this way, that means that when I put it in, my fabric is going to be facing up on one side. So if this has a pattern on it, maybe it has little dogs on it, you want to make sure that for your base, when you're putting it on, I've written base this way because it's going to be portrait inside the book, that when I glue the fabric and flip it over, the dogs are going to be facing up the right way. So always write the word in the way that you want the fabric to be facing. And the same with this side, this little piece on the other inside of your book. You want your fabric to be going portrait. So you want to put them on the fabric the way that they're facing in the book. Now this one doesn't have a direction, so I'm lucky enough I can put them any way I want to. So those are my two sides, some more two sides, and then my divider. Okay, and basically every piece needs to have about a 1/2 inch around each side. There is going to be some pieces that you cut the bottoms off, but to me it's easier just to make sure you have 1 inch around every single piece, except for the divider. The divider is going to have fabric going one side over the top and down the other side. So you want to be able to glue the piece on and flip it once. So you need a fairly wide piece because you're going to glue it and have this much fabric hanging down the bottom so that when you glue it, you can flip it to the other side and cover both sides, okay? So that's the only one you have to make sure you have enough room is for both. These ones you just need to have that little 1 inch, 1/2 inch around each side. So we're going to get gluing these onto the fabrics, and I normally start with the smaller piece and then we glue the bigger pieces on, and that's going to be our next step.